Hi friends, and welcome back to No Book Left Behind. I'm your host Mark, and today is my review of volumes 16 through 18 of the British Library's Tales of the Weird series. So today finds me back in familiar surroundings, but you'll notice this isn't exactly the same as my previous setup. There's no point in really trying to get the perfect match because all this stuff has got to be pulled out again because the room hasn't been redecorated yet after the smoke damage caused by the fire. So there didn't seem any point in really trying to be too exact with recreating what I previously had. This is close enough. So today I'm going to be talking about the British Library's Tales of the Weird series, and if you're a regular on this channel you'll know that I review these in batches of 3, and being the 6th video in the series we're getting books 16 through to 18 in the order of their publication originally. So let's start with book number 16, and this one is Into the London Fog, Eerie Tales of the Weird City, and this was edited by Elizabeth Dearnley. Now, this is a very unusual volume for the Tales of the Weird series. In fact, it's unique, at least so far, because in this book, Dearnley tries to present a portrait of London as a surreal metropolis, partially removed from reality, on the borderlands, if you like. Not necessarily always supernatural, but definitely offbeat, definitely a little surreal, and most importantly, weird. To explain, this is not just a collection of spooky tales, although there are 9 of them here. There are also 5 non-fiction pieces, 3 fairly lengthy excerpts of semi-autobiographical works, 1 descriptive passage about the metropolis from none other than Virginia Woolf, and 1 1884 magazine article about the activities of the famous Spring-Heeled Jack. And if you're unfamiliar with Spring-Heeled Jack, he first hit the headlines in 1837 when a servant girl reported that she had encountered a strange man on Clapham Common who had grabbed her with his metallic hands that were, quote, as cold and clammy as those of a corpse, end quote. Soon he was leaping out of the shadows at young women all over London, with some witnesses claiming that he escaped the scene by leaping over fences that were at least 9 feet high. Hence he became known as Spring-Heeled Jack. There were dozens of sightings of him over the following decades, with physical descriptions differing wildly. Some witnesses gave him metal claws, others said he had the ability to breathe fire. No one was ever arrested or even suspected seriously of being Spring-Heeled Jack, and his strange exploits passed into urban myth via penny dreadfuls, plays and songs of the time. And it's fascinating to read an article written about it in 1884 when the sightings had begun to wind down a bit but didn't die out completely until 1904. And although this might seem a fairly odd inclusion in a book of fictional tales, I did enjoy reading about this and I thought it was quite fascinating. Similarly, the Virginia Woolf descriptive passage had some wonderful moments, particularly when regard to second-hand bookshops, and how she describes the sense of adventure and possibility when walking into one. And I'm going to quote you what she says about second-hand books here. She says, quote, "Second-hand books are wild books, homeless books. They have come together in flocks of variegated feather and have a charm which the domesticated volumes of the library lack," end quote. And I love that. I think calling them wild and homeless, it just feels so right somehow. But anyway, moving on from there, let's talk about the fiction, because that's really what I'm here for and you're probably here for too. Now, there are some of the usual suspects of the Tales of the Weird series here. We've got to book 16, so there are certain authors who are cropping up quite frequently. E.F. Benson in particular seems to be almost ubiquitous, and yes, he has a tale here too. Also, we have one from Edith Nesbit, whose work has really quite enjoyed in previous volumes, but the story here didn't do much for me, I'm afraid. We've also got Charlotte Riddell, whose two Haunted House books comprise the second ever volume in the Tales of the Weird series, but unfortunately again I felt her tale was a little underwhelming. There are two standouts here for me, the first of which is The Lodger by Marie Belloc Lowndes. And this is the original short story which she later expanded into the very, very popular novel. And if you've been following the channel for a while, you may remember I reviewed that novel a couple of months ago. And it's quite fascinating to read the original bare bones short version, if you like. Because this is very much at its core the same tale. We've got the late middle-aged couple running the unsuccessful boarding house whose sudden trip to the poorhouse is diverted by the arrival of a strange but seemingly quite wealthy lodger who takes rooms with them. And at the same time, of course, there's lots of Jack the Ripper-like murders happening in the area. Could the two things be connected? And now, having read both the original short story and the novel, I think this expansion that she's done is really a textbook example of how to do that and to get it completely right. The other outstanding one for me here, and the best of the bunch really, is N by Arthur Machen. And this concerns two old gentlemen who are reminiscing about past times in the capital. And they remember rumours of an almost mythical, magical park situated somewhere in the north of the city, specifically around Stoke Newington. And it so happens that one of these gentlemen has recently come into possession of a second-hand book which seems to give an account of this place, although no one seems to know whether it really truly existed. Fascinated and hooked on the idea, the old gentleman goes to the area and sees if he can find the place. Now, this is an extraordinarily weird tale, in part because there's no real resolution. Things remain delightfully vague. In fact, it all feels like an excerpt from a much longer novel. And that really shouldn't work, but somehow it does, and that's a testament to Machen's masterful storytelling. I found this one absolutely fascinating. All in all, I thought this was a very good addition to the series. Okay, it's maybe not my favourite of the volumes that I've read so far, but it's certainly not the least of them either. Although I would say that some readers might find it a little bit of a chore to wade through those non-fiction pieces because they are rather lengthy and some of them are not particularly compelling. But overall, it gets a thumbs up from me. Moving on to the 17th book in the series, this one is Weird Woods, Tales from the Haunted Forests of Britain, and this was edited by John Miller. Now, there is no past reading roundup video where I mention this book, which you might think is a bit strange, but there is a good reason for that, and that's because I read this book a long time before I read any others in the series, more than a year ago in fact, and before I'd even started this channel, let alone thought about reviewing the whole series. And that was because my first exposure to Tales of the Weird was finding 3 books in a job lot. I think it was on a rather well-known auction site, and I thought I'd just invest to dip my toe in the water and see what the series was about, which prior to that I had no idea even existed. So there were pretty much, I think, 60 books out before I even knew about it, which obviously means I'm playing catch up and probably never will. But yes, anyway, those first 3 books, one of them was Weird Woods. So it's been a long time since I read it, and I did skim through it again in preparation for this video. And I was quite surprised to find that there were a couple of authors here, namely Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen, who I'd forgotten that I'd read any stories by them when I started into the series in earnest and began reviewing them. I was really quite surprised to see their names here, particularly because the Arthur Machen story is, guess what, N. Yes, the one I just finished talking about a couple of minutes ago. It appears again in the next volume in the series. And if you've seen some of these videos before, you may know what my opinion on that is already, because I'm not impressed by it. I know not everyone is trying to read these books in order, because really there's no point unless you're really pedantic like me, or anal if you want to use that description. But yeah, it does seem a little bit of a swizz, shall we say, to have the same stories appearing sometimes in one volume and then in the next one. It does seem a little bit unfair. When there is so many books, so many stories that could be selected from this wonderful archive that the British Library have at their disposal. Now, obviously, I appreciate that all these editors are working independently and you have publication deadlines and things like that, but it's still disappointing when it happens. But having said that, of course, it's still a wonderful story. Now, the Algernon Blackwood contribution is called Ancient Lights, and I'm not surprised that one has slipped my mind as well, because yes, it's a masterful evocation of atmosphere and creepiness. It's superbly written. Blackwood does an amazing job with that, but at its core is just about a guy getting lost in the woods for a few pages. That really is almost the entire plot. Yes, it's, as I say, a masterful example of how to do that and to put that across in a spooky and disturbing way. But the story itself, the plot, if you like, obviously isn't very memorable. There are also stories here from M.R. James, which obviously I was already familiar with. A Neighbourhood Pastime is his contribution here, told in his usual inimitable style. And there's also an Edith Nesbit story, Man-Sized in Marble, which I had forgotten about, but when I reread it for the purposes of this review, I was actually quietly impressed by it. There's a lot of good atmosphere and some fine writing in it. If again, the plot itself isn't particularly memorable. So are the rest of the stories here, the rest of the authors, somewhat overshadowed by these literary heavyweights? Well, yeah, I'm afraid they are a little bit. But that's not to say that there isn't some other good stuff here too. Best of the rest for me was An Old Thorn by W.H. Hudson, which gives a really good feel for the long historical relationship between humanity, trees and folk magic. There's also, of course, an E.F. Benson story. Where would we be without E.F. Benson? And that one is The Man Who Went Too Far. And I think, actually, having read an entire volume of Benson's work, which was previously published in this series, I think this is perhaps his best tale. It does run a little long, there's no doubt about that, but I still thought it was interesting, a little different. And that's what I think has been lacking for me, at least personally, in Benson's other work. I'd certainly say that one was worth checking out. Now, this is a solid collection with an excellent selection of stories. But I would say that if you want to read more extensively weird material about humanity's relationship with nature on a supernatural level, particularly with ancient forests and woodland, then your best bet would probably be to read some collections by Algernon Blackwood or Arthur Machen. So moving on to the last book today, the 18th in the series. This one is Queens of the Abyss, Lost Stories from Women of the Weird. And this one was again edited by Mike Ashley. Now there are 16 tales here, and pleasingly only 3 authors with which I'm already familiar. Mary Elizabeth Braddon, Marie Belloc Lowndes and Edith Nesbit. And as you might have gathered by now, a couple of them are fairly regular contributors to the Tales of the Weird. And right away I have to mention the story that I think's the outstanding one here. And that would be From the Dead by Edith Nesbit. Now it's a fairly simple tale of male vanity, regret and death. But it's the telling of the tale that's the important thing. I think few authors have ever managed to approach that morbidly obsessed quality of Edgar Allan Poe's best work, but Nesbit manages it here, and I think it's a truly impressive piece of work, and one of my favourite stories that I've read in the series so far. Now the other standout for me, even if it's not really at that level, was The Island of Hands by Margaret St. Clair. Now technically this is a science fiction story because the events occur on another planet, but they could as easily just have been somewhere in the South Seas, or maybe even deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. A man goes searching for his young wife, who's disappeared on a solo plane journey across uncharted oceans. He finds a strange island, and there he meets a woman who looks very much like his missing wife, and she tells him of the hands and the place of the shaping. Now, this is a very fresh and original story, and it really makes me want to check out some of Sinclair's other works. Elsewhere, there's some other good stories too, notably The White Lady by Sophie Wenzel Ellis and The Wonderful Tune by Jessie Douglas Kerush. The Ellis story is a truly bizarre tale of the botanical weird, which wouldn't have been out of place actually in the Evil Roots volume that came earlier in the Tales of the Weird series. Kerush is best remembered now for her novel The Undying Monster, which was turned into a movie in 1942 in the wake of Lon Chaney Jr.'s amazing success as The Wolfman. And that novel has actually been included in the Tales of the Weird series, although it's a much later publication, so it'll be quite a long while before I'm getting round to it. Another strong tale is The Anti-Macassar by Greer Lespina, which could be right up there if it wasn't for a rather strange element to it. You see, this was a story originally published in 1947, but there's nothing to specifically tie it to that period, so the events depicted could be happening in modern times. And that happens to be a little bit of a problem, because the main protagonist here is a buyer for a fashion house in Philadelphia, so she's very well educated, but she seems to have absolutely zero knowledge about vampires. So the story is presented as a bit of a mystery, but really a 10-year-old could pretty much figure it out. I mean, you have to wonder about this woman. Has she ever even heard of Dracula or seen a horror movie? It's unfortunate, because if the story had been set back, say, 50 years in the end of the previous century, it would have been a real winner, but it just really feels a bit strange reading it today. Lastly, it's worth highlighting The Sculptor's Angel by Maria Corelli, not because of the tale itself, which is fine by the way, but because of the potted biography that editor Ashley provides. Corelli's first novel was called A Romance of Two Worlds, which was originally published in 1886 and features a heroine who goes on a mind-expanding journey throughout the solar system. Corelli deeply believed in the occult and the supernatural, and also that she was the reincarnation of William Shakespeare. Her works were highly popular with the Victorian public of the time, although the critics thought she was awful. Editor Ashley describes them now as, quote, unreadable, end quote. She was also largely responsible for spreading the rumour about the curse of the pharaohs on the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb. She certainly seems to have been quite a character. Overall, it's another up-to-par entry in this incredibly consistent series, although it's worth saying that I think it's only the Nesbit and St. Clair stories that are really going to stay with me. So those are the 3 latest volumes of the Tales of the Weird series. Have you read them? Have you read any of these stories? What did you think of them? Is there anything that you'd like to suggest that you think I should be reading? Please put all your comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much for staying with me all the way through to the end of this video. Please pop me a quick like if you've a mind, and think about subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. I really appreciate it very much. And please don't forget to keep searching out those strange, narrow, twisted side streets of your hometown to find those unusual, forgotten, dusty second-hand bookshops. Don't forget to keep going to those charity shops, those market stalls and car boot sales, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Be seeing you.